We've been told for decades in all the science fiction we consumed that robots would eventually do the heavy lifting, the cleaning, the manufacturing. We'd be freed to pursue art, philosophy, and management. But it seems we got it completely backward.
We absolutely did. Today, AI is writing poetry, composing music, generating complex financial models in seconds. And what are humans doing? We're delivering food, packing boxes, and driving for Uber. We're not the managers of the future we were promised. We've become the cheap labor for the algorithm.
Right. The algorithm is the entity assigning the tasks. It's a complete reversal. We expected robots to clean our toilets so we could write poetry, but instead, the AI is writing the poetry while someone is still cleaning the toilets, and they're probably getting their next job from an app.
Exactly. The server is the architect, and we are just the muscle. And this isn't some distant future. This is the reality of the gig economy. Companies like Uber and Deliveroo are the early warning system for this entire shift.
But isn't this just a temporary phase? I mean, surely the robots will eventually get cheap enough to do the deliveries and the box packing too, right? Then we'll finally be freed as promised. Or is there something fundamentally more difficult about the physical world that we just totally underestimated?
You've hit on the core of it. That's the billion-dollar question, and the answer is something called Mousen, Wusen. It turns out we had our assumptions about hard and easy completely upside down.
Moravec's paradox. That sounds intimidating.
It's actually a pretty simple concept. It states that things that are hard for humans, like high level reasoning, complex math, or playing chess, are relatively easy for computers. But the things we find incredibly easy, like walking across a messy room, recognizing a face, or picking something up, require enormous computational power for a machine. Logic is cheap for silicon, but walking up a flight of stairs is a billion-year-old biological achievement that's incredibly hard to replicate.
So the prestige we attached to white collar work might have just been a historical fluke. We thought it was the pinnacle of difficulty, but it turns out the stuff we thought was hard is actually the cheapest to automate. And that brings us to the rise of the new boss, the algorithm.
Precisely. You don't need to look at sci-fi movies to see an AI boss. If you've ever driven for Uber or worked in an Amazon fulfillment center, your boss is already a server. It dictates your route, monitors your micro movements, and in some cases can even fire you with an automated notification.
That's a chilling thought. At Amazon, they track something called time off task, right? Down to the second. If a worker slows down for a minute, the system flags them automatically.
Yes, and that's the key difference. You're not being managed by Steve the floor manager who might understand you have a headache or are having a bad day. You're being managed by a server rack in Virginia that only sees a dip in its throughput curve. There's no empathy, there's no context. You're not a person to the system, you're a node in a network.
I can see how, from a corporate efficiency standpoint, this is a dream come true. No sick days, no arguments, just pure optimization. But if we look at this from the worker's perspective, what does that do to the psychology of work? Does it feel different to be optimized by a machine versus just being pushed by a human boss?
It's the difference between a conversation and a calculation. You can't negotiate with an algorithm. You can't appeal to its better nature. This kind of data driven management removes all the human friction, but that friction is often what makes work tolerable. Research shows that while it can boost productivity in the short term, the burnout rates are 2 to 3 times higher than with traditional management.
because you're no longer an employee with a career path. You're just a resource to be plugged in and then discarded when the task is done.
You're a biological API call, a temporary resource. So we've reached this strange point where the brain is silicon and the hands are flesh. And to understand why this isn't just a dystopian nightmare, but a cold, hard economic reality, we have to go back to Moravec's paradox.
Right? It sounds crazy, but the hardest thing for an AI isn't passing the bar exam, it's picking up a drop sock. The things we do without thinking are actually the most complex.
And that complexity has a price tag. It's a brutal economic reality. Generating a 5,000-word strategy report might cost an AI about 1 cent in electricity. But building a robot that can reliably navigate a cluttered basement to fix a leaky pipe, that costs millions in research, development, sensors, and titanium.
So, flesh and bone are just cheaper.
Incredibly cheap. Humans self-replicate. We run on a few thousand calories of food a day, and we maintain our own hardware. From a purely cold return on investment perspective, a human being is a pre-built, self-maintaining bipedal machine that is currently much cheaper to deploy than a Boston Dynamics robot. We haven't been outcompeted on price yet.
That's a really bleak way of looking at it. Is there a better way to visualize this gap between the all powerful cloud brain and the physical world it can't touch?
I think the best analogy is to think of the AI as a brilliant strategist locked in a soundproof glass box. It can see the entire battlefield, it knows every possible move, it can outthink any general, but it has no hands. It can't move a single chess piece on the board.
So it needs to rent a pair of hands.
Exactly. It needs to ping a human. That's why your food delivery driver is, in this model, a biological API. The AI in the cloud writes the code, pick up food at point A, deliver to point B prime, and the human is the physical cable that plugs that command into reality.
So if we're just rented hands for this AI strategist, what does that mean for the future of the human job market? It seems like it leads to a pretty chilling conclusion about who actually holds the power.
It does. And it means the survival of many jobs might not be something to celebrate. It turns out the machines aren't keeping us around because they value our input or our creativity. They're keeping us around because we're the cheapest way to move things in the physical world.
Our only competitive advantage is being cheap and dexterous.
It's a calculation of cost effectiveness, not a respect for human dignity. If your job consists of taking orders from a screen, you've essentially already lost your sovereignty to the algorithm. In this new structure, the only ones who truly remain free are the ones who own the code.
This feels like a new kind of digital feudalism. If we follow this to its logical end, does the middle class even exist anymore? Or do we just end up with the cloud lords who own the algorithms and the biological APIs who execute their commands?
That's the terrifying trend. The middle is being hollowed out. The people who used to think for a living, middle managers, analysts, even some creatives, are being pushed down into doing for a living. But the doing is now micromanaged by the thinkers who happen to be machines.
It forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. In this new hierarchy, are we the users of the technology, or is the technology using us?
Right? And the answer seems to be shifting.
So, if we try to boil this entire massive shift down, it seems the first key insight is a total inversion of what we thought had value. We overvalued cognitive labor because it was hard for us, but it's actually easy for AI. And we completely undervalued physical dexterity, which remains the most expensive and difficult frontier for robotics.
Absolutely. And that leads to the second point, which is the rise of what you called algorithmic feudalism. The old social contract between employer and employee is dying. It's being replaced by an API call where the algorithm just optimizes human labor like it's another hardware resource.
Which brings us to the final and maybe most sobering insight. Our survival in this new job market isn't based on merit or our human spirit. It's based on being the lowest bidder for physical tasks that are, for now, too expensive for a robot to perform.
It's a victory of ROI, not a victory of humanity.
We like to think of ourselves as the masters of our tools, but this biological API model suggests a darker reality. We are becoming the missing hardware for an intelligence that is already smarter than us, but simply lacks a body. The real risk of the AI revolution isn't that a robot will take your job, it's that you will keep your job, but you will lose your soul to the algorithm that dictates your every move. We are quickly reaching a point where the only thing human about the workforce is our ability to be cheaper than a sensor. And if you aren't the one writing the prompt, you are the one fulfilling the prompt. And in the future economy, that is a very dangerous place to be.